I gavel first? So welcome everyone to our September 4th Special Council Meeting Workshop. And all members of council are present other than Mayor Gray, who's out of town. We're going to start by the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. Okay, so the first item and only item on our agenda is item 1A, a discussion with Low Country Wildlife Specialist as it relates to the culling of deer. And at this time, I will have Mr. Dave Henderson, give Mr. Dave Henderson the opportunity to present his proposal.
Hey there, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Very good. So I thought I'd start with some, introductory remarks. I do not have a proposal that I was prepared to discuss in any detail at this meeting, but certainly able to try to answer your questions as best I can. I was accepted into the professional program at the Warnell School of Forest Resources in the fall of 1992. And I had an opportunity prior to starting in that professional program to do an internship on a deer project in Northwest Georgia at a national battlefield park. And it was kind of a mundane deer ecology, deer movement study, lots of telemetry, tracking deer with radio collars on them. But there was one portion of one side that abutted the park that was a private residential community. And there were a lot of deer, and the community was ungated. And it was the first time I had ever experienced what I'm going to refer to as, urban suburban deer and urban suburban deer conflicts. And it was something that was very interesting to me. People would come in from outside. Again, it was not gated, that they could view deer, traffic issues, on a couple of occasions, poaching issues, and seeing that kind of juxtaposition and that interaction in those conflicts was the first time that I had ever seen anything like that. So I went through the undergraduate program, had an opportunity while I was in the undergraduate program to do some volunteer work at an urban suburban deer project that was in the Savannah area, Savannah, Georgia. And at that time, it was the first project of its kind in the state. Again, this was something that was entirely new to us in Georgia. I then went into graduate school, so I received my BS in 95. I then received my MS in 1998, also through the Warnell School of Forestry and Natural Resources. And my master's thesis was on the deer herd in Sea Pines, which is a community on Hilton Head Island. And it turned out to be a very, very interesting project in that I was able to look at the issues that this abundant deer herd were created in this community, not only from a residential perspective, used survey to gauge perceptions pre and post treatment, but also from the deer and their biological reaction. We had radio collars on deer, and we looked at deer and their movement rates both before and after the treatment, which was a simulated lethal removal. We were concerned that with the timeline that had to be met for my studies, that if there was any litigation or any type of delays with lethally based management, that it would cause an issue. And so we simulated lethal removal by darting, transporting, and confining for a period of time to simulate this lethal removal. But that was in 98 when I received my MS. I then became gainfully employed by that same community on Hilton Head Island that I'm still employed with full-time today. In 2001, I co-founded Low Country Wildlife Specialist. We were interested in looking at what we thought would become more and more of an issue, in this case in South Carolina. And in fact, in 1999, DNR developed their urban suburban deer management guidelines that allowed communities to have, special privileges and special techniques that allow them to control these deer populations. And so I actually was directly involved in the very first project in 1999 that utilized this permitting process. Formed Low Country Wildlife Specialist in 2001. In 2003, I was accredited by the Wildlife Society as a certified wildlife biologist, a designation that I hold to this day. And then since then, I have personally worked with, in the last 25 years, about 25 communities, help them with their deer management problems. The majority of the communities that I've worked in the last 25 years are located in the greater Hilton Head area of southern Beaufort County. But in the last some years, I've also been involved with communities in eastern South Carolina, as well as northwestern South Carolina. And, I'll end with this in that, as far as introductory, is that, while every community is different, there are some ties that bind. And, one of those is that, these are very challenging problems for your decision makers, because there can be differences of opinion in the community, in some cases very strong opinions on both sides of the issue. And these decision makers have often found themselves in difficult situations in which they're trying to, do what they think is in the best interest of the community. I learned while I was in school that, wildlife biology is the art and science of managing wildlife populations and their habitat in the interest of humans. And so this type of project, this type of situation is just something from the very beginning of my wildlife career I have just found to be, intriguing and challenging all at the same time. So that's a brief introduction of me, and be happy to go on to the next step and answer any questions that you all may have.
Open for questions.
Yeah, Mr. Henderson, wanted to say thank you for your time this evening. I appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening. Like what you said, we do have residents that feel very passionately about the deer in our community. And but one thing that we could all agree on is the safety of our community, and that's a top priority for our deer management program. So my question to you is, have you implemented a deer management program like this before in a densely populated community? I know that you said that when you started, it was at Hilton Head Island, but I don't know what Hilton Head Island really is like because I haven't been there that much. So have you done something like this, like in TK, how densely populated we are? And if so, how was it done safely?
Yeah, that's a great question. And safety obviously drives this train of the utmost importance. Almost all of those 25 communities that I referenced earlier are as developed as TKK, and in some cases more developed, heavily developed areas. There are a few exceptions, but the average community over the last 25 years I've worked with is heavily developed. And some of the communities, in addition to that I've worked in, also have a heavy visitor / tourist component to it as well. The fall and winter used to be kind of off times many years ago, but these days, while it is less than during the summer, there doesn't really seem to be a shoulder season anymore. So not only have I worked in communities that are highly and densely developed, but in communities that on top of that has a heavy tourist and visitor component. But in broad terms, the way that this process works is that there are shooting sites that are identified well in advance that meet whatever ownership, obviously safety, whatever ownership and other operational considerations that there are. Those are all satisfied. Sites are identified in advance, and then the actual shooting is done from those sites. And so we're picking sites that meet all of our requirements, with safety being number one in advance, and all the deer that are collected are taken at those sites.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. This is Scott Shirley. Thank you for joining us. Have a couple of questions for you. I appreciate your background and expertise and the experience that you've gleaned from your years of doing this. It's comforting from Councilman Carter's question about the density and the safety factors, so thank you for assuring us on that. One of the questions that I have is, how many folks will be with you, will accompany you when you are going through the culling process? Will it be just you, or will you have the other partners present?
It'll be likely just me in the vehicle, and then also, we still have some details to work out. But certainly, one of the requests that I have made, as far as proposals and other things, contract that has been submitted to you all, is that there would be a dedicated law enforcement officer that would be there to provide whatever assistance was needed during the operation.
Okay. The sites that you were talking about to identify shooting sites, have you already done that? Done some site visits to identify those areas, or is that still yet to be done?
I did one preliminary site visit earlier this year, and the primary objective of that visit, because I'd never been to TEK, it's very nice, by the way, was to see if there were a sufficient number of sites available before I would even commit to the project. And so I satisfied myself, based on that first visit, that there were enough sites that were available. And it's not only the number, but it's the distribution. So I'm confident that is the situation. There will be additional site visits, site familiarization, site selection that will continue with at least another visit or two between now and later this year, certainly before any type of field work would begin.
Okay, very good. And of those site visits that you're anticipating identifying, there have been some questions among ourselves as a council, and also with the community. Are you looking to identify some sites of private property?
At this point, with my working assumption that it would be city or owned property or available property that you all could offer up. But if there were private property that were appropriate, that you and council were agreeable to, obviously the owner was agreeable to, access is something that you can't have too much of. Right. But my initial review was working under the assumption that it was going to be city property that was the ownership requirement. But if we are able to identify any other sites that satisfies my safety and operational needs, that access could be gained with permission, it's certainly something I would consider, assuming that you all found that acceptable.
Okay. I have a few more questions, but I'll ask one more, and then I'll give the others an opportunity to speak with you as well. During projects like this, in communities like ours, obviously you've been to several communities that are densely populated, heavy visitorship and tourism. Kind of describes Sea Pines perfectly, but it also, in a way, describes TEK. It's a great destination, a lot of homes in close proximity. With those challenges to satisfy a permit of 80 deer, do you, in your experience, when would you anticipate being able to satisfy that permit from the time you begin?
Well, I can draw on some experience to give you kind of a range, but we have a couple, X factors with the TEK project specifically. Primarily is going to be the sterilization work that's going to be done prior to my work and the sharpshooting work. We do have, reasonable confidence in the deer population estimations that have been generated the last couple years plus. But I won't know what, for example, 200 marked sterilized deer in the community looks like in the field until I have more of an opportunity to see what that looks like in the field, right? So based on the numbers, I don't anticipate that there would be any significant efficiency issues because obviously these marked sterilized deer will not be removed. But on the off chance that it turned out that in the field, a significant percentage of the deer that you're encountering, on your route and at these sites is marked, well, then that's something that could impact the efficiency. So that is a little bit, of an X factor. And then also this work will be done late night after the vast majority of human activity is done. Again, I've worked in many different communities, from private golf club communities to, areas where it's busy all the time. And so, does that mean that in TGK that the appropriate time to start is 10 p.m., 11 p.m., 12 a.m.? I don't know, but that is something that will need to be determined. I'm assuming it's somewhere in that range. And then on the back end, you need to be able to be finished and up and gone and out of the way at an appropriate time, which is probably going to be 4 a.m., 5 a.m. And so we by setting that beginning and ending time, we've now established our work window that is realistically going to be 5 or 6 hours at the absolute most, right? And so you need to keep that in mind. But to answer your question, based on other areas in which I think I had a similar density of shooting sites, I would expect that 80 deer could be obtained in 2 to 5 nights. I'll say 2 to 5 nights, just to give me a little bit of wiggle room. But just based on other projects I've done, including this past permitting season earlier this year, I think the 2 to 5 evenings is a reasonable estimation.
I appreciate that, and I know that there are a lot of factors at play, and I appreciate you sharing them with us. And I don't ask that question to pin you down. I just ask that question to have a reasonable expectation. So we know that if you encounter a lot of tagged deer, that's going to change your operation. But thanks for sharing that with us.
Yes, sir. Happy to do so.
This is Carmen Miller, and as a follow-up question to what you noted with coordinating with the sterilization process and also then having to work around the tag deer, would it be possible to have a conversation with Dr. DeNicola where both of you are working towards maybe breaking this into quadrants or map areas where he's sterilizing certain areas of the peninsula or the city, and then that leaves you the opportunity to do the culling sharpshooting in other areas where the deer have not been tagged? I think that might also be helpful in just the behavior, if I'm understanding all that correctly. Is that something that you can work with Dr. DeNicola and set that up?
I know Dr. DeNicola well. We've been professional colleagues for 20 plus years. I'm frequently in contact with him independent of this project. So I have full confidence that we will be able to coordinate and cooperate without any issues. My thinking, Dr. DeNicola may have a different view, but my thinking is that I think we have, unless there's some time-sensitive issues that I'm currently not aware of, I think there should be plenty of time for him and his team to be able to do their thing before I come in. And one operational or practical consideration is that the deer that are being captured for the field sterilization are being captured with a dart rifle. And so it is somewhat inherently less efficient than a normal rifle. And so it may be more appropriate for him to be able to get to these deer with the dart rifle before I'm in there and accessing. But I'm happy to talk to him about that. It's just intuitively, I think going the dart rifle route it probably makes more sense before I was to go in there and conduct work.
Go ahead.
This is Brian Carter again. I wanted to follow up with Councilman Shirley's his question about the operation, and you were talking about you would be the only person that would be sharpshooting or culling, but once you cull a deer, how do you get that deer? Because if you're looking at 80 deer for 5 nights, that's like 16 a night. How would you get that deer from where it's culled to wherever it needs to go?
Yeah, that's a good question, and just to confirm, I would absolutely be the only person that would be utilizing a firearm. Absolutely. So the deer processor will be kind of on station and there, as well as hopefully a member of your security department, and the deer will essentially be loaded as we go into the processor's truck, so that at the end of the evening, when it's time to complete work and to head out, all the deer are in the deer processor's vehicle, and then then they leave and go back to their processing facility to process the deer so they can be made ready for charitable donation as required by the permit.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then for the city, either Joey or Charlie, do we already have a deer processor in mind? And are we looking to, if we go through and approve everything, donate the meat to the Catawba Indian Nation again?
We will most certainly be having those conversations. Our assumption would be probably the same deer processor as this past year. We have not had the conversations with the Catawba Indian Nation yet, but absolutely can do so. Especially based on their response from the last go round. So we definitely enjoyed connecting them in the USDA. We would look to try to help facilitate as well.
And from the proposal that has been sent to us, the cost of the processing is included in the total that we're considering, right?
It is. If I'm using the processor of my choice, if it's not that cost could be backed out, right? If finding a processor that is local or that you have some comfort level with, I could certainly back that out and be happy to discuss that. The processor that I use, who would be a little ways away from you all, is the one that I have worked with for almost all of the 25 years. And it's not that I started with one processor, but I ended up with one. And so when you're doing this type of work, it is very important that everything is picked up in a timely manner, and reliability and consistency, and to be able to be on scene while the operation is underway is of critical importance. And so happy to discuss. I just have a long history with a processor that has met my dependability and reliability needs. And then as far as who specifically gets the venison, that is certainly not an issue. And if we were to use my processor, make whatever arrangements we needed to make to get it to your local folks, I have done that on several different occasions, including some of those not local projects that I referenced earlier, where we were able to get the venison back for that local market, if you will.
Thank you.
Question as far as the timeline breakdown of the actual operation. When we did this earlier this year, there was a 3-day window of culling, and then I think a 5-day window where we didn't have activity, like a cool off period. Is that the way that you manage this also, or is this going to be 8 nights in a row?
I hope that it's not 8 nights, but let's just say for the sake of argument that it was 8 nights. No, I would not do it 8 nights in a row. I would reserve, I'm not able to tell you how many nights I would do in a row at this point, because really what my objectives are is to be efficient, while at the same time not getting deer that are in the field, you know, where they have a flight response that not only impacts my efficiency in the immediate term, but could, negatively affect the program's efficiency going forward. So it's very, very important that you operate efficiently and in a way that does not cause the deer that are remaining to have a flight response. So it would not be 8 nights in a row. It would probably be, a couple, 3 nights in a row. And then if needed, how many were left? Could we possibly go a portion of one more evening and to go consecutive and finish it up? Possibly. But that ultimately, that call, I would be in a much better position to make once I'm able to see what the field conditions are and just what the efficiency levels are. But I do not want to be there in a way that causes, again, deer that are still on the landscape to have a flight response that's problematic for me and for, and for the program going forward.
And if if you were able to get to those 80 deer, or were tracking to get to that in the time frame that you're thinking, at what point would we have to make the decision to let you know that we are interested? Or I guess we would have to get that permit increased to an additional 80. How do we coordinate that with you? Because what you're anticipating, a 2 to 5 night for the 80 deer, that's significantly faster than what we saw earlier. So I want to make sure that if we are going to get to those numbers and we have the opportunity to add the additional 80 and we consider that we're ready for that. So how would you advise us to react to that?
Yeah, I have a general understanding of when the sterilization work is going to occur. I would need to get a better understanding. Schedules have kind of firmed up. And then also probably need to see, how efficient that operation is. I have every reason to believe that Dr. DiNicola and his team is going to be as efficient as humanly possible. I have confidence in him and his team. But how many deer, if you were to ask me right now, does that equal in a day? And how many days they're going to need to complete their work? I don't know that. My current thinking, again, would be happy to discuss more with staff or whomever you would like me to, is that I would start some point thereafter, after the sterilization work is done, but before the end of the year. The permit that you have or extension that you could get is good through March 1st. And so that would still leave plenty of time under that scenario. The question that you're going to want to get clarification on is that, as I understand you all went through last year, it's a kind of a special process that involves the South Carolina DNR board if you were to get additional tags. And so my understanding is that the board does not meet in December and that they would meet roughly mid-January for the first time in 2025. And so we need to factor all of that in if there is the possibility that additional deer may be requested, so that the board has time to make that decision to then give us time to implement before March 1st.
So thinking ahead a little bit, Mr. Henderson, do you think there is any reason, do you have any reason to believe that you're not going to be able to get the 80?
No, I don't. And based, again, on my site visit, my experience, I think it is incredibly likely, right? But there, as I mentioned earlier, a couple X factors. One of them is what do all these marked deer look like, on the environment? What, if any, interference might I encounter from, folks that may be opposed to the project? That's something that I cannot predict, but that is something that has at least got to be, considered. And then one other thing related to not only, having those marked animals that have been sterilized, but these are going to be adult does. They're going to be, captured, field sterilized and released. So these are, for lack of a better word, the matriarchal leaders of these family groups that you're seeing in your yards, right? These are the groups of 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, however many there are, that is often led, it's a very matriarchal society with white-tailed deer, by these older does. And so at the end of the day, and Dr. D. Nicola would have a lot more experience and insight into this, and I frankly don't, but what does having those adult females marked mean, not only as individuals, but as their roles of leaders of the group? So if I show up and they're like, I don't know what he's up to, but it's not good, and I didn't like it, and they were to flee, as the leader, the rest of that deer group is going to go with that matriarchal doe. So it's a little nuanced, but it's more than just having 150 or 200 deer marked in the population. It's that these are going to be the deer that are the leaders of these groups.
Mr. Henderson, this is Tom Heislip. Just had one question going back to the property. So I don't know if you recall from your site visit here, but on the peninsula, we call it, original TKK up at the tip of the peninsula. It's there's not much public property up there. It's all privately held. But that's one of the areas that's most impacted by these deer because it's heavily wooded. But since there's no public property, the culling can make it difficult. So we did a survey recently and had hundreds of homeowners agree to allow a sharpshooter to shoot from the private property. So I would just ask, when we get you the data, we can get you the addresses, something you may be able to look at when you come up on your site visit to look at where you're going to shoot, because that's the area really that's being impacted the most by these deer. And if we don't take any from that area, those poor residents are they're not going to feel any relief. So if possible, I'd ask you to look at the map of those areas that will allow you to shoot from and see if there may be some way to do some culling in that area.
Yeah, understood. And you're spot on. Access is important, as you may or may not know. White-tailed deer that live in urban suburban areas have much smaller home ranges than deer that live out in the woods, right? And so the home range size, while I don't have specific information for TKK, I can go back to my work in sea ponds as a graduate student, in which I looked at that as part of my master's thesis. And we're looking at seasonal home ranges for adult females that could be measured in 100 acres, a couple hundred acres. I mean, this is the area that they are born, and they live and they die. And they're not going to range over any larger area than what they need to in order to meet their needs. It's just that even though it is developed, areas like TKK, from a deer's perspective, is very good deer habitat. So their home ranges are not as large. And to your point, if you don't have access to get to these deer that may have pretty small home ranges, that don't even know that a couple roads over, that there's a couple roads over, you will not be able to access those deer. So I will absolutely work with staff or who I'm directed to work with to see if we can identify areas that otherwise there would not be access to see if it meets all the requirements that I have. But I'm absolutely happy to do that.
Maybe two more somewhat tactical questions, I guess. He shared with us that you have a processor that you work with that sounds like that individual or organization is as experienced as you or similarly experienced to understand what's required to make this efficient. I for one, I know I only speak for myself here, but I for one, I'd rather see you work with someone that knows the program, knows the challenges, knows your expectations, and can do it not just efficiently, but with little impact on the community. So I don't have any issue with that myself, and it's not my decision alone, but just wanted to share that with you. Transportation, while the culling is going on, is that something that is a swift vehicle, side-by-side, golf cart, something like that? How does that operation work for you to get in and get out quickly?
Yeah, it'll all be vehicle based, right? I mean, so no golf carts, no UTVs. It will all be vehicle based, specific type to be determined, but it'll all be vehicle based, just as the deer processor will be as well. So no golf carts, no UTVs, all vehicles.
Okay. And tell me a little bit about the weapon and ammo that you'll be using. Are you subsonic and suppressed, or what's that look like for you?
So a little bit to be determined. I can give you some general info, and the reason why it's a little bit to be determined is that I'm currently working with others on, developing a new platform, a new weapon system that may be utilized. But they're all sound suppressed. Some are subsonic, some are not subsonic. They're 22 caliber for the rifles, possibly a larger caliber for this, other system that's currently in the works. But these are, the same, with the exception of kind of the one that's kind of in development. These are the exact same platforms, exact same weapons and calibers that I have used from the beginning. So they're proven. They're absolutely capable of efficiently creating instantaneous unconsciousness, which is the goal. With this, the deer do not run. They drop in their tracks, and that's the whole point, for a variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But I have absolute confidence in that. I just, because there's a couple unknowns some months out from now, I can't give you exact answers, but that's what I can give you at this time.
Thank you.
A little bit in line with the types of guns and ammunition and all that. Can you share just a really high view of what your safety protocols are and that you've implemented, because of your experience in working in dense residential areas? That's obviously one of the biggest concerns for our residents, is to know that all the right safety protocols are going to be used. Is there something that you're able to share with us that would set some of those concerns at ease?
Yeah, I think I can offer a few general comments that will hopefully be helpful. So selecting the sites, again, based on ownership, safety, ownership, and other operational considerations, those sites are set up so that there is a known backstop, right? There is a known backstop behind where the deer would be. I use ammunition that is specifically designed to fragment immediately upon impact. It is exceptionally rare that there is a bullet or a bullet fragment that exits the deer, but these sites are set up to allow for that possibility, to allow for a miss. They're rare, but they're higher than zero. And so when these sites are set up, that is all part of the calculus, so that if you miss the deer, or a portion of a bullet fragment goes through the deer, both of which are highly unlikely, that there are still plenty of backstop there to ensure that the surrounding properties, there is no safety issue. So it's the site selection, it's the ammunition that is used, and it's just a lot of experience in working under those constraints, right? So if you have a shooting site that meets all those requirements, there will ultimately be situations where the deer may take a few steps one way or a few steps the other, and in some cases that makes the difference between it being a safe shot and it's not being a safe shot. And so you have to have the discipline and the discretion and the feel to be able to do that. Think of a lot of these shooting sites. Think of it if any of you have ever been to an outdoor gun range, right? Typical outdoor gun range is that you have a parking lot, you come in through the office, you go through the back of the office, that's where the benches are, that's where the shooting occurs. You have an earthen berm that is most likely going to be, 12 to 15 feet tall, and it's a three-sided berm. So you come in from the back, but the two sides and the front of the berm are there. Perfectly safe for you to sit there all day long and to shoot into that berm. Now, clearly, if you were to turn around and shoot towards the gift shop or back towards the parking lot, that's a problem. But that is, in essence, how these sites are set up so that you have a sufficient backstop to allow for these deer to safely be shot, to allow for the possibility, again, of a pass-through or a miss.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Anyone else? Charlie, do you have any questions, any follow-up? Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure as council decides to move forward, we'll be having lots of follow-up conversations with Mr. Henderson, but definitely appreciate his time.
Yeah, absolutely. Charlie, if I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Henderson. I apologize.
I'm sorry. I just wanted, if I hadn't already, I just wanted to say thank you, for the opportunity to get before you all, and thank you for, allowing me to remote in. I know it's not the same as in person, but just because of time constraints, I do appreciate to have that option, and I appreciate your time, and we'll certainly be coordinating with staff as we go forward, and making sure that should additional questions come up, I'm sure they will as we progress further into the year. I will make myself available in whatever form is deemed appropriate to make sure that each and every one of you have a confidence level in the work that's being proposed.
I think it's safe to say that our confidence level's gone up significantly since having this conversation. We appreciate you doing this with us.
Happy to do it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your time and for being available. I think
Very
that's
welcome.
all that we have. Thanks so much.
All right. Everybody have a good evening.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
We're adjourned. Do I have to know?